food being the third biggest category on TikTok, brands are going to want to get around food, right? If you're an automotive brand, if you're a credit card brand, if you're a tech telco brand, it's not just for food brands. This is content that people are consuming at scale. And it, in a mindset of making something or doing something, it inspires action.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Vanguard podcast. I'm Jenny Rooney with Adweek, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Erika Badan. She is the CEO of Food52. And Erika, welcome.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here. I'm excited to have you tell our community a bit about your journey, a bit about what you've done in your career, and certainly what you're doing now at Food52. Let's start with you. Tell us about your history and what got you to this place.
Thank you. So I think my career has been super interesting and totally uninteresting and big and small. And I just wrote a book on work called Nobody Cares About Your Career. And that's generally how I think most careers look. I started my career thinking I wanted to be
I care, Erika. I just want you to do that. I care.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I care about your career too. I started my career thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. I worked at Fidelity Investments. It was in the late 90s. I was making at the time what I thought was a lot of money, and I still think is a lot of money, which was $50,000. And I dropped it all to leave the legal department at Fidelity to go work in the marketing department and make $17,900. And I remember the HR person being like, "You're such an idiot. Like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You're working with all these Harvard Law graduates, these like lauded people." And I was going to go work with the state school people in the marketing department who were also, side note, mostly women versus working with predominantly men. And I didn't care because I always felt and still feel in my career that I just didn't want anyone to eat my dream, and I didn't want anything to pass me by. And I was feeling very bored in the legal department. And the marketing department felt fast paced and it was interesting, and they were bitchy and dynamic and people were fighting all the time. And it just felt interesting.
A lot of drama in marketing.
A lot of drama in marketing departments, which is fun. So I made the move. The internet was just kind of bubbling up to be something at that time, which was a real lucky break for me, and a stroke of luck. I've spent the rest of my career in the internet. From there, I went on and worked at a bunch of ad agencies. I kind of worked my way up the media buying, media planning, media strategy ladder, and then I took a jump to go work for Microsoft, which was that was a big move for me, to move from not just the buying side of the equation or the planning strategy side of the equation, but to the publishing world, which is really where I fell in love with content, technology, monetization, marketing. Worked my way through Yahoo and Microsoft. I helped take a company called Demand Media public, which was really built on creating content for Google. And then found my way to a CMO job at AOL, and which was all I had ever wanted in my career, was to be a CMO. And I got the CMO job and I was like, oh God, I hate this. This is the worst. And then long story short, I left that, which we can dig into any of this. I left that, went to a startup in music, and then joined Barstool Sports as its CEO. And then 10 years later, here I am at Food52.
So let me ask a couple quick things about that story, that journey story, if you will. What was your educational background?
Oh, I was like a beer drinking, liberal arts, sports playing liberal arts graduate. I went to Colby College in Maine.
Parents went there. Yeah.
Oh, they did? That's fun. Yeah. Colby's cool.
It's very cool. Yeah. Cold.
Very, very, and far.
And far. But liberal arts. So yeah. You hadn't really honed in on anything. I mean, frankly, and I'm of the vintage too, that college was where you got to explore different things. You didn't have to, it wasn't, basically professional school grooming you for your career the way it is today. Unfortunately,
it's so funny. College is now professional school. And, my parents were teachers. My mom was a vocational teacher. So she was always kind of in professional school mindset. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I liked a liberal arts school really because it was very social, which I liked. And it also taught me how to write and think, which I thought was the most important thing academically that I could get out of college. Now it's really different, when you think about, and I think about the people who, I live in New York, so the people we look at, the people we hire, it's far more driven in terms of just the pressure cooker of internships and skills, and I'm an expert at this, that, and the other thing. College was kind of a luxury when I went anyways, that there wasn't that pressure to have it all figured out.
100%. Couldn't agree more. Both because I was an English literature and creative writing double major in undergrad. And, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, I'm biased, but the skill of writing and being able to story tell and express yourself and communicate in written language, the fact but also I have a high school senior who is going through the process right now of applying to schools. And it is a very different than when I went through it. So, but anyway, that's just interesting to me. And I actually appreciate the fact that you had, frankly, what I consider like a flex educational background, right? So that prepped you and enabled you to, frankly, move in many, many different directions, which clearly you had, although you quickly found this calling in marketing and then more deeply into media. Let's go back one quick step to the AOL position. I'm sorry, the CMO position at AOL. Why did you hate it? Why was it just so challenging? And by the way, I talk to CMOs all the time about the challenges and struggles of being in that role, but I'm just curious, what's Erika's take on?
Yeah, my take on it was I had a couple inflection points in my career. The first one was that I could take a dramatic pay cut and take a job that the quote unquote establishment didn't think was the right choice for me. That was big. That was a big moment for me. The second was when I moved from working in a bunch of ad agencies to Microsoft. It was because I wanted to make the thing, not just buy the thing and put the thing in another plan. I wanted to get more hands-on in making the thing, the product. And when I got the AOL CMO job, I was so psyched. I mean, I remember getting the business cards, and I think I bought myself a watch. Like, I was very excited. But what I started to realize was how powerless the CMO position is in a lot of ways. The CMO is somewhat, and I think it's probably exponential. This was over a decade ago that I was a CMO, but the CMO is accountable for responsible for so much, accountable for some, but not all, and actually quite little. And if you don't have a good product and people inside of your company, let alone the customer you serve, don't care about this product, being a marketer can be an insanely frustrating experience. It was a good experience for me. I learned a lot. I learned how to navigate and work across a lot of different groups of people: technology people, product people, sales people, crazy people. But I also felt increasingly powerless, where it was a head of state that actually had no country. And I think that's what's really hard for CMOs. And then, I think now it's even more difficult, which is, what does a CMO own? Are they a technologist? Are they a data expert? Do they understand performance and conversion? Are they brand marketers? Are they storytellers? And it's very hard to have all those skills in one brain or in one body. And when you look at the tenure of CMOs, it's fairly dismal. And you see that being a CMO is like being a Premier League coach. You're going to make it like 3 games, and then you're going to get fired because they're like, you can't get what we want done.
Oh my God. By the way, I'm inviting you right now officially to our Marketing Vanguard Summit in Chicago in May, because I would love for you to come talk to our room full of CMOs and engage in dialogue around this very fact and tell your story, just because I think.
Oh, that's fun. I'd love to do that. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. So you heard it here first, but I fully want to do that, Erika. So, look, it is honestly the gems you just dropped as far as the reality of the role is spot on, but the way you described it is frankly something that's unparalleled. I love it. The head of state without a country. I mean, this is exactly what everybody in that role is dealing with every day. Now, for you, however, you did move into CEO roles. And I think there is a cohort of CMOs who have moved into the CEO role. And in fact, I've been monitoring that and tracking it, if you will, for the last 3 to 4, 5 years. And, there's a pretty decent critical mass of folks who have made that move successfully. I would say largely they came from CPG, but that's not across the board. I mean, there have been many, many cases of folks, moving to tech companies as CEOs and all the rest of it. So what has been your experience in that migration? And talk a little bit about what had to happen in order for you to make that move.
I'm excited about CMOs moving into CEOs because I think that is a good path for women actually to take CEO jobs. Because when you look at typically the sourcing for CEOs are finance people. You're either a revenue person or you're a finance person or you're a tech founder, right? Like you have some genius founder ability. For me, the journey was I knew I had to leave the CMO marketing track and move into something with more revenue responsibility and revenue responsibility. So I went to a small startup. I took a president title and was responsible really for product development and marketing and sales and revenue. And that was really the springboard to take the Barstool Sports job, which was that I had a president title and responsibility. I had worked at an early stage startup and was able to grow it. I had obviously had big company experience at Microsoft, Demand Media, Yahoo, AOL, et cetera. I think the path from a CMO to a CEO, that first CEO job, at least in my experience, that anybody takes is a little bit of like your head's in a pretzel because you are accountable for all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very easy for people to stay in the comfort zone of just what they know and to hire people who they are most comfortable with or who are most familiar to them.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the Barstool journey was a crazy one. We had astounding growth over 8 or 9 years. It was very volatile. It was insanely public. It was very fast. But what I feel like now in retrospect is finding people who had skills that I did not and who were extremely strong in those skills and thinking more about, hey, how am I bringing all these people together against a huge vision? And how do we mobilize everyone to run as fast as they can and build as much as they possibly can? So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I do think, one of the hard things I do think in the transition is there's a lot you have to get your head around. Most CMOs, I do not think are P&L minded. And I think this is one of the greatest deficiencies, at least I had going into a CEO job. So making sure you have a very, very, very solid, outspoken finance person to me has always been like A1, A higher. And then the second piece is in a lot of ways, CMOs are very deferential, right? They're deferential if they're working with a creative agency and there's some creative genius diva and you're deferential to the diva, or you're deferential to the CEO or the product person or the head of revenue. And when you move, you can't be deferential. You have to be in charge. And that's a big pivot, I think, from the enablement of other people's things and putting a wrapper around them to facilitating the thing itself.
So well said. And I love that you just identified 2 massive skills that are required for that pivot. One being very much a hard skill, P&L management, financial mindset. And you can get that through your co-conspirator and a CFO. But then the soft skill of being where the buck stops, right? Like that's certainly a very different environment to lead within. Let's now talk about Barstool, because obviously, that is what a storied company, right? With such a history, controversy, evolution. talk about your intersection with Barstool. Where was the company then? And sort of how did what had been your journey there?
Yeah. Sorry, can I give you one other thought on the CMO to CEO? Is the other thing I think I wish when I was a CMO that I had paid more attention to the financials. And I think one thing is that there seems to be an impression or a division of labor at companies where CMOs kind of stick to their lanes and they kind of zone out when everyone's talking about the revenue or the cost. But if you can be, as a CMO, extremely clear on where and how the company makes money today and could make money tomorrow, that focus will make you insanely successful as a CMO. And I think that's something more CMOs should consider a priority and not a tax, and also be something that CMOs pursue within the organization. So that, just a thought there. Like, that's something I wish I had done. The Barstool journey was crazy. It was, for me, it was my first CEO job. It was a startup full of 12 guys from Boston, and there was no P&L. They didn't have email. They didn't know how to use Slack. They had a culture that they knew to write a blog and throw up a blog every 30 minutes, and that was work. They didn't work at home. There was a little office in Boston and a dentist's office. And so the early stage of that journey, we didn't have an office. We didn't have a P&L. We didn't have any business people. There was one sales guy. But what the company did have was absolute clarity on what it was good at, and almost defiant clarity. And that defiant clarity was, they knew what was funny and they knew how to make their crowd laugh. And that was a great thing to start with. And it's actually something I think about a lot today, which is that level of clarity. One thing I think you lose, or I find gets lost in companies, is that just the maniacal view of like, here's what we're here to do and here's how we're going to do it. But that's really what I started with.
Do you see any parallel, by the way? I lived in Chicago in the 90s, like to The Onion and that sort of?
Oh, definitely. The early days of The Onion, there's so many. Vice, the beginning of Vice, like art scene, Montreal, alt culture, like they were it. It's the thing that's interesting is that when all those companies got bigger, then they lost the maniacal focus. And really, I think what we did at Barstool was we kept the focus. And to this day, the focus exists. So I think that's the difference. That's partly why we became such a juggernaut. I remember meeting with Vice. I remember meeting with Vice when I was at Barstool, and I had this meeting with the head of Vice Sports. And we were trying to figure out if there was a deal there or a partnership or something. And I asked him about his customers. And he started talking, and then I realized he was talking about advertisers. And I was like, oh, you don't even think about humans. And it was so like, oh, like, that you don't think about those people. But anyway, so, the Barstool journey was wild. It was, what was so wild about it is when I had got to Barstool, the investor felt that we should be making $25 million in revenue in 4 to 5 years. The company was making, I don't know, maybe $5 million in revenue when I got there. And maybe it was even beyond that. It was maybe it was like 2025. It actually was, I think, a longer trajectory in that. We were making $25 million within something like 24 months or 18 months. So the growth that the company had was so staggering, and it created a lot of management challenge. Like we always talked about being at Barstool as its dog years. Like 1 year at Barstool Sports is 7 years somewhere else. And part of that reason is the internet is a hard knocks place, and people are crazy and the internet moves a mile a minute. But it was also that the business changed so dramatically so frequently. And so when I look at the time, I was always worried about getting fired. Like I was either going to get fired because Dave Portnoy or somebody said something and nobody liked it, or I was going to get fired because I couldn't keep up with the growth. I couldn't keep a handle. I couldn't, I had the tiger by the tail and I couldn't get a hold of it. And so that to me was the biggest part of the journey, which was this constant need to iterate and change.
So when you went to Food52, how did you deal with, I mean, these are vastly different cultures, right? So talk about that transition, the concern that that stakeholders might have had with that, and how have you been navigating that?
Mm-hmm. So the real luxury, I always say I will never love anything the way I loved the time at Barstool Sports. I loved working with Dave Portnoy. I loved building something. It was so hard and so fun and wild and unpredictable. You couldn't have scripted it. But the real luxury I had was that there was nothing to start with from an infrastructure or from a business perspective. So I didn't have to fight anyone to build it. They were just so grateful that somebody was there and believed in them and could build something. And what I loved about the culture we created was we really created a culture of you sparked an idea and a 20 something in a pair of gym shorts would run it and take it to the moon. And that was a really neat culture. Food52 was really different, right? When I came into Food52, the company's been around since, let's say 2010, 11, 12, early, how do you describe that? 2000s, maybe officially like 2014, but 2014 to 2024 is 10 years of ways of doing things. And, the other real challenge for companies in this space is COVID was just crazy. The business triplicated, the demand came out of nowhere. And when it's kind of, I always think about it like child acting, like, or, music stars, when you become a star at age 13, you kind of stop developing after age 13. And I think there's a lot of businesses that COVID came along and they just stopped because COVID was so much to handle.
Correct. And by the way, for people who don't know what Food52 is, can you just give us a...
Yeah, sorry. So Food52 is an awesome company. Really interesting. It was created by two women, former New York Times food writers, and they created it in Amanda Hesser's kitchen. And the idea was they wrote recipes, they tested recipes, they wrote about what they were using and cooking with. They built a really, really fantastic community of people who were passionate about, food as the center of a well-lived life. If you think about what Emily Weiss did with Glossier, these ladies were doing this in food. And they then developed it to build, their own products that were created in partnership with the community. They then created a shop that was beautiful and very aspirational. And then to what I was mentioning, the company became so big during COVID because all anyone was doing was redecorating their homes and thinking about their table and living inside their house.
Nesting, really.
Nesting, exactly.
Such a time of that.
Exactly.
You come into that from Barstool. I mean, totally.
Yeah, it's so different. It's so different. Yeah. So, and I wanted that, to be honest with you. I spent 10 years marketing to 18 to 34-year-olds, predominantly men. I can sell ice to an Eskimo if he's an 18-year-old. Like, I know how to market alcohol to young people over 21, but like with my eyes closed. But I wanted a different challenge, and I wanted something where I was marketing to an audience that looked in some ways more like me, that was a female audience, and that in a subject matter that I'm interested in, which, in particular home, and, I'm learning how to cook. So to a degree, food. I think the challenges are, right now I'm in my first 6 months here, and it's a lot of listening, right? It's a lot of like, well, how do we do this? And why do we do this? And how did we get to think that this is the way to do this? So one is like the peeling back of the onion. When you look at the internet, food is the third biggest category on TikTok. And food media is so disrupted. It's anyone with an iPhone and a skillet, So I think that represents really incredible opportunity. I think the distribution system that TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Substack that they represent is so ripe for a brand that's thinking about how do you make products? How do you make products in partnership with an audience? How do you find personalities to attach to those products and to take them into communities of their own? So I'm really interested in a couple things here. One is just really unparalleled design. So we have a brand called Schoolhouse, which is known for its lighting and textiles and increasingly furniture. We have Food52, which has historically been known for recipes and kitchen, but will increasingly be known for tabletop and home and vintage and decor. And then I will build a media business around this, not similar to Barstool Sports in that there won't be a Dave Portnoy and we're not going to have podcasts in the way we did at Barstool because podcasts were exploding when I got there and that's the path we chose. But a content engine that thinks about lots of different voices in lots of different homes and places and thinking about how do we bring those to advertisers to tell their story with our story, and then how do we bring our products into that environment.
So, I want to circle back 1 second to the concept of how you're engaging with advertisers, but how are you also kind of working around there was sort of a movement, I guess, to become sort of all things to all people and had lost a little bit of focus, Food52. So, bringing it back to this concept of a highly curated selection of artisan goods. How are you thinking about doing that?
Yeah, I mean that was a big thing that, obviously was covered in the Adweek article is, when I got here, there was, I think, close to 10,000 SKUs. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly sure it was like 9,000 something SKUs. And if you come from mass retail, I don't come from mass retail. If you come from mass retail, there's a really good proof point that the more SKUs you have and the more newness you drop, the more customers you'll get. And what had happened in my observation in Food52 was that in an effort to scale the business, the management and the board hired more traditional people, right? Kind of similar to me going into Barstool. Barstool wanted to be a bigger media business. They found me, I'd had bigger media experience. The challenge is when you have a brand that's built around community and that the relationship between the audience and the product and also the brand, more isn't more. More actually is a fast track to far less because you don't stand for anything. And so, we'll see if I can be successful with this, but I really believe we need less, fewer, better, more differentiated, more distinct SKUs and better storytelling, better distribution, better volume against those. And that's the big pivot that, I'm in the process of making right now. And I feel pretty bullish on it. We'll see. I mean, there's people here who are like, you're crazy and it's not going to work. And, maybe it won't, but I'm fairly sure, Barstool Sports, it's a totally different category, but we built, over $100 million commerce business just on t-shirts. And it was because when we dropped a t-shirt to a specific audience, it meant something and you wanted to have it. And that's no different in home. That's no different in food. It's no different in fashion,
or frankly, in any community. I mean, we as Adweek are talking about this all the time, and our CEO Will Lee often uses the phrase we need to do, fewer things better. And I just think that you just have to make that a priority because the meaningfulness is what you need to make sure you're always prioritizing.
Absolutely. And look, you see this, which is, I see this every day, which is, you used to need in my sports life, you used to need ESPN and to watch Sports Center because you wanted to know the scores of the game. Now you go on Twitter or you go on the internet, you see it in a second. When you look at the home space, you can get anything you want on Amazon. Nobody's going to out Amazon. And so the idea of competing on more that's same there are already giants in that. The real win is a, bespoke boutique type of strategy.
Well, even going to your website, right? To go to the Food52 website, the way it's designed, even the typography, the imagery, the colors, like you look at it and my subconscious mind is, oh, I want to be part of this.
Definitely. I think this is beautiful.
Correct. That value right there, right? Vastly different experience than shopping on Amazon. So
definitely. Yeah, you really hit on it. I agree with that. One of the things we've been talking a lot about is what are these values? To me, there's real thoughtfulness and purposefulness in the design that we choose. And I think this is important for any business. You could be making media content, you could be making kitchen gear, whatever, it doesn't matter. But there's a real purposefulness, there's a real thoughtfulness. Two, we really care about sustainability. One of the things I'm really seeing is this idea of the non-toxic home and just this awareness around what type of products are you using to wash your hands, to prepare your food with, that you sleep on, that you wash your, sustainability and non-toxicity, I think, is really important. Beauty is really important. And then the last is just, the solutions. People are busy, people are stressed, they don't have a lot of time, and the utility piece is super important.
Now let's quickly get to the brand engagement piece, because I know that you just held your first upfront. Why did you do it? How did it go? And, what does this speak to as far as how you more broadly want to build relationships with brands moving forward?
Yeah, I love brands. So I think one of the greatest things we did at Barstool Sports was that everyone was in the business of working with brands. So when we had an advertising part, one of the things I really didn't like about my time, a little bit at AOL, very specifically at Yahoo, was that the editorial people didn't like the advertising, right? It was stinky. And I always hated that. One, it made my job very hard when I worked there. And two, I felt like it was disrespectful because advertising pays so many bills in a company. And so one thing that when I got my first CEO job, that was very important to me, which was everybody, and I mean everybody, is in the ad business. And we will carry through that same strategy here at Food52, which is, we are really fortunate in that we have millions of customers with their credit card out looking for something to buy, or looking in an action mindset, looking to make something, looking to do something. That's a great mindset for an advertiser to be next to. It's brand safe, it's beautiful. So we had our first upfront, I guess, in September, October, so pretty recently. It was awesome. We did it in our own way. We brought people into our home. Our home here in Brooklyn, our office looks like a home. It's beautiful. We had all sorts of different activations, floral design, embroidery, tasting, watching our test kitchen and our personalities make all sorts of different things. And the goal of it was for brands to see what we are bringing to life, and also more specifically, how we could bring this to life for and with brands, both endemic and certainly non-endemic. And I really think, back to the point of food being the third biggest category on TikTok, brands are going to want to get around food, right? If you're an automotive brand, if you're a credit card brand, if you're a tech telco brand, it's not just for food brands. This is content that people are consuming at scale, and it, in a mindset of making something or doing something, it inspires action. And the goal for the upfront was to bring as many brands as we could into that.
Love that. Well, we're going to have to, like I said, I'm going to have you at the Marketing Vanguard Summit. You can share more about that story and share your story with everybody there. But for now, Erika, I'd like to ask you the last question I ask of everybody, which is, who's next? Who's somebody else who you admire, either somebody you know really well or somebody you admire from afar, who you think I should have on the show?
Oh, I love this. There's so many people. I think what Alex Cooper is doing is quite brilliant. I don't know that she's next. I would say she's now and pretty big. So she would be someone who I think you should look at. I also think so I would say Alex Cooper, I think, is really interesting in building a touring business and a media business and a marketing business on your own, which I think is interesting. So she would be my pick.
Love that. Erika, thank you so much. This is a pleasure. It's been great getting to know you, hearing your story. Wish you tremendous luck with Food52 and can't wait to take it. So,
okay, great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Marketing Vanguard, part of the Adweek Podcast Network and Acast Creator Network. This podcast was produced by Jordan Pretano, executive produced by Al Manarino and John Heil, and edited by Lane McGibney at Boutwell Studios. You can listen and subscribe to all of Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. Stay updated on all things Adweek Podcast Network by following us on Twitter at Adweek Podcasts. And if you have a question or suggestion for the show, send us an email at podcast@adweek.com. Thanks for listening.